Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt, with a few remarks about Oscar Micheaux's silent film, Within Our Gates. Commentary that will require us to consider its cinematic nemesis, D.W. Griffith's infamous blockbuster, The Birth of a Nation. The words, "It's just a movie," have been used to quell the fears of those scared by horror flicks, and to temper the optimism sparked by futuristic sci-fi films. These four words have refuted the bleak view of human nature dramatized by film noir, and pooh-poohed the rosy picture of family life framed in sentimental holiday fare. The prevailing thought behind "it's just a movie" is that cinema only has an impact on us if we let it, and that maybe we shouldn't allow it to have such an outsized influence on the way we think about ourselves. The thing is, whether we want it to or not, visual storytelling continues to have a tremendous impact on the way we configure our past, present, and future. Want to know what life on the moon or Mars might look like someday, or what could happen to Earth if we don't use its resources more responsibly? Watch a movie. When natural disaster or large-scale financial malfeasance devastate a country in our own time, the statistics thrown at us about the cost in lives lost and homes shattered, unfortunately, have only a slight impact on sensibilities hardened by the unending scroll of catastrophes that fills our news feeds. Many of us don't begin to feel the pain of others' tragedy until it's dramatized on a screen. When a historical figure piques our interest, we're more likely to watch a period piece than open a book. For better or worse, our understanding of Mozart and Beethoven, General Patton and Captain John H. Miller, Elizabeth I, and Queen Victoria has been indelibly shaped by Hollywood. What movies suggest about our world's most innovative scientists, worst conflicts, and most powerful leaders provides a foundation onto which we stack newspaper articles, biographies, historical fiction, and critical essays. Seems a bit backwards, doesn't it? Academics would love it if those curious about a subject always started with 3 or 4 books on a topic written from a multiplicity of perspectives before even considering the subject's necessarily truncated, highly selective representation in television or film. This is, of course, an unrealistic expectation in our fast-paced, overly scheduled world. Everything not a moving image has to work 10 times as hard to catch and to hold our attention. The best we can hope for, it seems, is that those interested in a topic will at least watch multiple films, television series, and maybe even documentaries about a given issue. On the 50th anniversary of the end of the United States Civil War, at a time when few surviving combatants and politicians remained to provide personal accounts about the conflict, film director D.W. Griffith released a rhetorically powerful film about the war and its aftermath. The Birth of a Nation was a technological marvel that immediately polarized America, dazzling its audience with original film techniques, even as its ideological bias outraged discerning viewers. You may not have seen this film all the way through, but you've probably caught snippets of it in other films, like Peter Bogdanovich's Nickelodeon, Robert Zemeckis' Forrest Gump, and Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman. It was the first film to play at the White House, an event which implicitly granted its point of view a stamp of approval, at the same time that it was sparking angry calls for censorship elsewhere. Scenes depicting interracial violence were removed before it could play in a number of states, and both Ohio and Kansas banned it completely. It outraged the 6-year-old NAACP, and with good reason. Many historians believe that this one film single-handedly reawakened the dormant Ku Klux Klan. The reasons are self-evident and numerous. One of the film's most notorious scenes involves the death of a white, childlike teenager who, throughout the film, has bounced about her Southern household in high spirits, gracing everyone with innocent smiles and playful banter. During the period of Reconstruction following the Civil War, this young woman finds herself fleeing before a rapacious black man who chases her through the woods and up a steep incline. Ultimately, she decides to jump off a cliff and straight into heaven, where, as an inner title card explains, she is joyfully welcomed for having preserved her honor. Though less dramatic, the film's other representations of Black Americans prove equally troubling. When the wealthy Cameron family checks in on their plantation, we find slaves enjoying a 2-hour break during which they gamble about and relax in leisurely fashion. A bit of narrative camouflage, uncomplicated by any representation of suffering. When the Camerons send their sons off to fight Union forces, all the slaves gather to send the soldiers off with, I kid you not, good-natured cheers. After the war ends and South Carolina elects people of color to the state legislature, the Black politicians proceed to behave in disorderly fashion, drink whiskey under the table, and fix their attention on legalizing interracial marriage, the prospect of which clearly unsettles the white women in the room. And don't get me started on the two mixed-race characters whose designation as mulattoes seems intended to telegraph their future villainy. Unfortunately, the film's problematic content struck with incredible force because of Griffith's revolutionary artistry. He used intertitle cards not only to introduce characters and supply dialogue, but to explain the authenticity of particular scenes, like the assassination of President Lincoln, which he modeled on historical facsimiles. Such repeated claims about the accurate mise-en-scène or arrangement of key scenes lends an air of realism to the entire film. Griffith also employs tracking shots to capture swift movements during action scenes, color tints footage to indicate tonal shifts, and dynamically crosscuts between multiple storylines so that audience adrenaline levels rise to new heights. Towards the film's dramatic close, for instance, he cuts back and forth among Black soldiers running amok and imperiling a white family's country cottage, a mixed-race politician ready to sexually assault an uncooperative white woman, and the KKK riding en masse to the rescue. The Birth of a Nation was so compelling that it altered the calculus of film production, proving that audiences were now ready to sit still for longer stories. The Birth of a Nation, a 3-hour movie, sold out repeatedly, all on its own. The film wasn't an elephant in the room. It was a behemoth, one so enormous it left little space for contrary perspectives in the movie house it filled. Its success, however, did not stop determined filmmakers of color from generating alternative representations of Black folks' motivations and aspirations. Bill Foster had founded the Foster Photoplay Company in Chicago 5 years earlier, and now actor Noble Johnson and writer George Perry Johnson set about creating the all-Black Lincoln Motion Picture Company in Los Angeles, which launched 1 year after the Birth of a Nation. Oscar Micheaux became one of the Lincoln Company's most prolific filmmakers, creating over 40 so-called race movies between 1918 and 1948. These films cast primarily Black actors, many with minimal experience, and typically played for Black audiences at midnight rambles. Consider Within Our Gates from 1920, the oldest of Micheaux's extant films. The very title signals a one-sided, violent contest conjuring images of a military incursion that has overrun the walls and broken down the portcullis of a once secure community. The title admits that the odds are stacked in favor of the aggressor. If those under attack are going to survive, their response must be wily and multi-pronged. This film provides one such shrewd counter-response. At first glance, The Birth of a Nation appears to represent both sides equally as it jumps back and forth between North and South. But it ultimately proves far less balanced than war films like, say, Tora, Tora, Tora. Griffith's film opens by proclaiming the honorable intent of conveying the ravages of war to the end that war may be held in abhorrence, and blames, quote, the bringing of the African to America for planting the first seeds of disunion. For a moment, it pairs the horrors of war and slavery, and even follows with a sympathetic portrayal of the abolitionists seeking to end race-based subjugation altogether. The story which unfolds, however, clearly hews towards the propaganda of a later intertitle card. It seeks to romanticize the southern plantation as a utopia, quote, where life runs in a quaintly way that is soon to be no more. Within Our Gates, by contrast, opens with a surprising observation about the current status of racism in the United States. The film's first intertitle card tells us that 1, the prejudices of the South do not exist in the North, an obvious falsehood to anyone who has studied the period, and 2, the contradictory admission that this supposedly just and equitable region still witnesses the occasional lynching of a Negro, as if such murders were the utterly random product of chance. This tongue-in-cheek opening unsettles the viewer, who now has no idea what to expect. Will the film's impending portrayal of a lynching cast it as a product of circumstances outside anyone's control, or will it take a swing at systematic racism? Within Our Gates keeps us on our toes by refusing to reduce either white or black characters to easy stereotypes. Like Mary Ann Evans, pseudonym George Eliot, who mocked fellow novelists in the Victorian period for writing as if true feminism required every female protagonist to be an intellectual genius and moral paragon of virtue, Micheaux refuses to configure all his black characters as upstanding model citizens. The primary black characters in Griffith's film, played by white actors wearing blackface, fit neatly into one of 2 categories: faithful drudge or degenerate wastrel. Those in Micheaux's film constitute a broad and diverse cross-section of society and prove difficult to pigeonhole. The decorous and suave behavior of a would-be lover disguises an unrepentant life of crime. A seemingly sympathetic friend vacillates widely in her alliances, swinging between jealous betrayal and passionate defense. An educated and dapper fiancé violently betrays his deep-rooted paranoia in a near-deadly moment of weakness, and a servile bootlicker who quickly earns our disdain later becomes pitiful when turned on by a bloodthirsty mob. Even the central hero, the brainy and generous Sylvia, betrays a dangerous naivete that undermines her apparent intelligence as an educator. Remember what I said about Griffith's inventive use of cross-cutting among scenes intended to occur simultaneously. Micheaux employs this same device to repudiate the very premise promoted by Griffith's use of the technique in The Birth of a Nation, that race-based violence is an apt remedy for social unrest. In Griffith's film, the KKK boldly rides to the rescue of urban and rural victims alike, losing some of their number to hostile fire in order to re-establish the order shattered by black aggression. Micheaux's own film unpacks such assumptions about black violence, first by spotlighting prejudice, misinformation, and yellow journalism, and then by cross-cutting among lynching, sexual assault, and a bonfire, which all involve aggression against black Americans. Unlike Griffith, whose film provides an early example of what we now call trauma porn, in which filmmakers provide cheap and often demeaning thrills by showing characters suffering up close, Micheaux decides to capture the horror of violence by implication more than delineation. We watch as a hanging rope thrown over a raised crossbeam tightens slowly, but aren't forced to witness the noose constrict around anyone's neck. Micheaux cuts regularly to a bonfire constructed to erase evidence of these murders and shows the mob milling about the flames, but does not show any ghastly close-ups of charred bodies. Admittedly, the attempted rape is incredibly distressing. You should know in advance that it involves desperate struggle, tearing at clothes, and a victim who alternates between valiant defense of her body and moments of emotional paralysis in which she appears almost reconciled to her fate. Thankfully, Micheaux interrupts this assault with an unexpected revelation I'll leave it to you to experience yourself, a revelation imbued with situational irony which underscores the tragic history of slavery in the United States. The film ends with a person of color encouraging a prospective love interest to be proud of their country, particularly of what Black Americans have repeatedly accomplished when called to put their lives on the line in various wars. According to this well-read doctor, Black soldiers fought honorably in Cuba during the Spanish-American War of 1898, in Carrizal against a Mexican force led by Pancho Villa in 1916, and again in France during the Great War. "We were never immigrants," he attests. Did Micheaux intend his audience to ignore the racist doctrine of manifest destiny, which informs the first two of these three conflicts and the closing comment on immigration? Or was he being subtle? One answer might just lie in the way the good doctor's lover non-verbally responds to his words. Watch closely. Then decide for yourself whether or not her body language counters what the last intertitle card declares and the film's closing shot suggests. As is the case with many a good film, we are left to draw our own conclusions.